My guest today is Dr. Julie Ponesse, an author, PhD in ethics and philosophy, Brownstone Fellow. We discuss her new book, Our Last Innocent Moment, the ethical codes that constructed the world as we knew it, and the new religions defining the world as we know it now. Dr. Ponesse is a masterful storyteller and brilliantly puts a human face to our global tragedy. This conversation is full of timeless wisdom and one that will stick with me for years to come. Stay tuned. Dr. Julie Ponesse, thank you for your time today. It's an honor to talk to you.
It's an honor to be spoken to. To speak. We live in such a culture of silence. I don't know how familiar or common that term is, but culture of silence is any kind of culture where silence is privileged over speaking anything, not just speaking the truth, but speaking at all. And I think so many of us feel confined and restricted and intimidated and bullied, whether in formal ways because maybe our employer or our spouse has said don't say that kind of thing, or in more subtle but insidious ways where we're just getting the message that there are certain unspeakables, certain things that you're not to talk about in polite conversation, in coffee houses, at the dinner table, at work, anywhere. And so just getting on a Zoom call and having a conversation is exactly what I think the state and the left, they don't want us to be doing these things now, because talking is so important, because talking gives you power just by the action, and it makes you think, and it helps other people to think, and exchanging ideas puts them out into the atmosphere and doesn't just keep them locked up in your head anymore. So that's a very long-winded way of saying thank you.
Oh yeah, no, I it's funny because you just opened up a concept in my mind. I've been contemplating a lot lately about this ideological prison that we find ourselves in, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is that over time the list of taboo subjects slowly expands, right? To a point where, we're in this space where you can't really step out of line with the commonly held beliefs, even though they're more like a religious faith than a science or even a reality-based viewpoint, right?
Think about the cost of that for a minute. It's not just that you aren't allowed to speak anymore, but you aren't really allowed to be human anymore. If you
Yeah.
can't, right? I mean, what is it to be human anyway? It's to be able to act as a human does, think as a human does, speak as a human does. And when you cut that off, you're taking away a part of our humanity. And it's not surprising that we start acting like inhuman creatures, like animals, like robots, and so often, I don't know if you feel this, but I'm out in public walking down the street, or and it just feels like you're among robots
Yeah.
who are not thinking, who just stop all ideas at the door and say, I'm not a thinking thing, don't approach me.
Yeah, no, I've felt like that for a long time. I mean, I'm
Mm.
originally from Vancouver, BC, and there's definitely Vancouver is a very strange place because there's kind of like the outer person, the outer shell that you present, and then
Mm.
the real person inside. And people that I know who visited Vancouver from other places always had the same observation that there's something dark kind of underneath the beauty, right? That there's
Looking.
yeah, that there's something there, right? And I tell them it's misery because really what it is it's a very image-based culture in Vancouver, right? Everybody's got to wear the outfit. You got to, go to yoga. You got to walk your dog on the beach, get your coffee a certain way. It's very uniform the way people behave. And it's very far left, coincidentally, right? But underneath it all, it's like there's this human element bubbling that's been, as you described, constricted, but also suppressed. And when you suppress that humanity, that real person, that flawed, ugly person inside, well, beautiful person with ugly elements,
Mhm.
eventually it just kind of it becomes malignant and cancerous. And that's the way that I've always felt about Vancouver, the culture there. It's just very you get an uneasy feeling when you really get into the culture and who the people really are.
Well, don't knock coffee or walks on the beach, but that aside, I certainly know what you mean about a kind of facadism. It's true where I am too. And the thing about that facadism where what you present to the world is different from who you are on the inside. There's sort of two problems with it, I think. One is that eventually you work so hard to pretend to be something else that you don't know who you are anymore. So there is not a kind of facadism. It's just a veil that's covering a sort of emptiness, right? You're not masking who you really are because there is no who you really are anymore. And the other thing about that that's so troubling is that if there's a difference between who you are and what you present to the world, namely who you are and what you say or what you do, then it's very hard to have integrity, because integrity is a wholeness of the system where all the parts function together. So when we say that a person has integrity, we mean that they do what they say they're going to do. Their actions seem to reflect their principles and the beliefs that they have. So when that person says one thing and does something else, or says something for the world, but really questions it and worries about it and wishes they were someone else on the inside, the practical upshot of that is that they're breaking, they're crumbling.
Yeah.
And it's not possible to be happy and content in that state, never mind all the psychosomatic physical repercussions of that kind of emotional instability. So it's not just a caricature, it's actually quite a big deal morally, physically, psychologically. And it's not surprising, I think, that we're seeing things like increased drug abuse, increased alcoholism, decreased levels of satisfaction across all facets of life, including, and maybe most horrifically, among young people and even children under 10 years old. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. That's, I talked to Dr. Roger McFillin. He's a clinical psychologist, and he talked about that a little bit in our conversation. In that, well, let's start, because I had a question I wanted to start with, and it's probably the dumbest question you've ever heard. I think it's a day one university question that a dumb student walks up and asks you, but I'll ask it anyways. Why are ethics important on a broad scale? And why are biomedical ethics important specifically?
It is not a dumb question at all. And interestingly, I taught in university for about 20 years, and you realize over that period of time that the seemingly dumb questions only come out after a very long period of study. So it would be much more likely for a grad student or a seasoned professor to ask that question than it would be, right? Because first, there's something about humanity that makes it hard for us to see the obvious. But why is ethics important? It's I think people often, when they hear the word ethics or morality, kind of are a bit put off, because it sounds like you're about to be told what to do. Right.
Yeah,
So it sounds like it's a Ten Commandments sort of thing. And there
right.
certainly are, religious people who are ethical and are interested in ethical questions. But and the question, what should I do, which is the one we always think of as the moral question, is important because you want to know what to do, because doing good things we think is good for yourself and for the world. But I think over the last 4 years, what the events that transpired have shown us about morality is that there are some other questions that are even more important and more revealing, such as, once I know what to do, why don't I do it? Right? Why is courage so hard? And why do some people have it and others are unable to have it? Right? Why does morality matter for my life overall, more generally? We were just talking about integrity. And I think that's one of the key pieces to the puzzle, key ways to answer that question. Because if you are a broken person, if you either don't know what you believe, or you say things or do things that are different from what you believe, you break apart, because now all of a sudden your reasons for acting are different from the actions themselves. And then how are you supposed to feel about what you've done? Right? You think, well, I just did something that's not what I was going to do. That's not what I had reasons for doing.
Right.
So if I act in a way that's different from the reasons that I have for acting, right? So I might say, well, I want to be honest with my spouse. Why? Well, because I want a relationship in which we know each other. I mean, that's a reason, right? And so if I'm dishonest with my spouse, and then I try to reflect on that action, and I look at the relationship, And now I no longer understand why I'm even in a relationship, right? So failing to act morally, failing to do what we believe is right, has far reaching consequences into our lives. Aristotle, who was I wrote my thesis on Aristotle. I, long after that, spent a lot of years reading about him, writing about him. I still write about him. He's in the book. Because for him, he thought that what he called eudaimonia, which we often translate as happiness, but it's something more like flourishing. So you think of a person who just really seems to be doing well in all parts of their lives. It doesn't mean that they're, necessarily successful at work or well off financially, but they just seem to have got it all together. They seem to be really just doing well and content with their lives. For Aristotle, that person can't be in that state unless they're first virtuous. And for him, that meant having virtues like practical wisdom and courage, which we talk a lot about these days, and generosity and honesty and magnanimity, which is kind of greatness of soul. And so it's not just that we should do what's right for ethics' sake, but we should do what's right for the sake of our whole lives and the people around us, and creating better communities, being better citizens, creating a better world overall in which we have a sense of why we do what we do. Right. I write in the book a lot about the difference between facts and values, and how just because we figured out scientifically how to do something doesn't automatically mean it would be better for us to do it.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
So ethics helps us to understand why we do what we do. It helps us to become people who have values in our lives, who understand that our children are more important than our reputation, that peace of mind is more important than social media likes. And those values are what make us who we are, right? If someone says, well, what do I think of when I think of Julie Ponesse? It's nothing really other than a set of values that she portrays to the world, right?
Right. And you talked about, excuse me, commandments, the 10 commandments, right? And it's that Judeo-Christian ethical code that kind of formed the foundation of Western society, right? Like
Mhm.
everything, all of our laws, all of our rules, all of the way that we interact with each other is all based really on that Judeo-Christian ethical code. And you spoke about virtue, and this is something that I've noticed happen over time. I've recently this year last year reestablished my spiritual base. And the thing that I've kind of come to realize is that we've stripped that Judeo-Christianity out of our society slowly, little bits at a time, right? And uh you talk about virtue, and there's a phrase, virtue signaling, which is now very common, right? Which is a way of signaling to people that you're a virtuous person in accordance with the ethics outlined by whatever ideology you subscribe to, right? Or that the scaffolding for the ideology. And it looks, or at least it seems to me, like we've replaced that Judeo-Christian God with whatever God you choose, right? Whether it's, neoliberalism or, celebrity worship, whatever it is. And then we mold our own ethical code against whatever it is that we've put our faith in. And so we don't have that commonality between us anymore, where we're all following the same ethical code. It seems like there's multiple codes, and then there's us on the outside, people like thinking people going, what, how is this like virtue signaling, for example? You and I can see through it. It's disingenuous and insincere completely. um
Mhm.
so please go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, as you were speaking, I mean, if you think about, if you were to take a person who's the stereotypical virtue signaler, they put the mask up and they hold it as they go in the grocery store and then take it down. I mean,
Right.
there's the typical sort of virtue signaler. They say all the right things about gender and all of that. And if you ask them, why do you do it? Why do you do that? You know, I think the answer would be quite revealing, because do they do it because they genuinely believe that those actions and words are meaningful? So are they genuinely subscribing to the ideology that requires them to act a certain way and say those things? Maybe they are, right? I mean, maybe they really believe in a certain kind of virology that suggests that mask wearing in that way is the most effective way to be a good person. I don't know, maybe. But I think more often than not, the virtue signaler is the this is not a word, so don't anybody get the wrong impression here, but a facade, like we were talking about before,
Right.
right? A virtue signaler to me is someone who doesn't really know why they do what they do, but they do it because it's a kind of morphing with or conforming with their tribe, right? So um, we use gender pronouns in our Twitter bio or whatever we do. We put on the mask just in the way that certain animals fluff their feathers around enemies or a potential mate, you know. And it's become very biological and very much a reflex. And the problem with that, right? I mean, it never offends me so much that someone thinks mask wearing is right. What offends me more is that they haven't put any thought into doing it. That it's an unreflective reflex action based on absorbing unconsciously or subconsciously what's going on in the world around you. And it's that creation of unthinking people that is so worrisome right now. It's not to be too hard on people, it's we live in an incredibly complicated world, so much larger than it was for our parents, than it was for me when I was a teenager, if for no other reason than because of what the internet and cell phones have exposed us to on a daily basis. So we're bombarded not just by world events, but by what's going on in other people's lives, right? Because of social media. And when you feel so overwhelmed and you need to parse that barrage of data, you need to do something. So why not just do what everybody else is doing around you? You know it's going to result in less confrontation. You won't be as conspicuous. You're not going to lose your job. You'll keep your friend group. You can keep buying Lululemon or Stanley Cups or whatever matters to you,
Right.
you know. And I don't mean to be too facetious about that because those products are incredibly successful for a reason because they matter deeply to how people present themselves to the world and gain steps on the social ladder that do translate into things like who you marry and what kind of job you have and how popular your children will be and how much money you have and all these things, right? That matter to people. Um, I don't know what we were talking about. Did I get us
No,
all?
no,
Yeah.
no, that was brilliant. Sorry, I was lost in it. I was like, yeah.
I
So
lost you at Stanley Cup, I think.
no, no, what you're saying is so true because, so your new book, Our Last Moment of Innocence.
Mm,
I read a bunch of it last night. It's just absolutely brilliant, as all of your stuff is, and I'm not blowing smoke. I really do mean that. You
I
talk a lot about how people just kind of conformed to these edicts that were handed down. See, this is the thing that I've been struggling with, and I'm going to go back to the Judeo-Christian ethics just for a second here, because it seems like once we got rid of that, we're naturally looking for a higher power to cling to, something to hold on to, right? Because I think it's that higher power serving something greater that gives us meaning, and that's really what we're looking for, is meaning. And I think that
You just gave
during
away the rest of the book. You don't need to read it now.
yeah, for people listening, I asked Dr. Ponesse
This is
last
the
night if she
Coles,
wanted
this
to
is the
talk to me.
JC version.
Yeah. And I'd only partially read the
Well,
book, and she's like, "How's tomorrow?" And I was like, "Okay, well, I guess it'll be up to 2 a.m. now."
well,
But
you know what's interesting about that though is that I do write a lot about that in the book, and I think you're exactly right that we do better as humans when we see our place in the universe as smaller than something else. And that's another way I think to say the word transcendence,
right,
which you said, right? For something to be transcendent, it is beyond us, it's outside of us, it's greater than us. People will often say, I had a good friend in graduate school who would often talk about she loved going to the ocean or the mountains because it made her feel small. And you might think, well, why do you want to feel small? I mean, aren't we kind of an arrogant species who want to feel grand? Well, we are. We surely are. But at the end of the day, I think to feel grounded and stable and comforted and like our lives mean something, we know that we can't give meaning to ourselves.
right,
I think
absolutely,
we know that,
yeah. Yeah,
right?
we do. And I'm a parent, you're a parent. I think
Mhm.
we find meaning in that. I've found a ton of meaning as a man in being a father to a little girl,
Mhm.
and just being a father in general. But I you know, I during the last 4 years, from the beginning of the pandemic until now, and I do believe that the that the need that the loss of meaning is increasing in scope for a
Mm.
lot of people, right? I I
Yeah.
watched people change, and you talk about this a lot in your book. Watching people turn on a dime, become another person for
Mhm.
fear of being ostracized from whatever community they're a part of or whatever ideology they consider themselves belonging to. But what I see that is just what I see in that is misplaced faith. And I saw that quite a bit, right? Where people were, well, just do what the Health Canada tells you to do what Dr. Fauci says, just blindly believing whatever propaganda was handed down to them because they were placing faith there. And in your book, you talk about this concept of scientism, which I had heard previously, but the way you explain it in your book is absolutely on point. So would you mind going into the concept of scientism, what it is, and the way that it relates to society at large?
Probably the first place to start is to say that you get a fuller sense of this from looking at the words than we do speaking them, because in the book I capitalize scientism and not science, because I think we've come to worship. When I talk about scientism, I mean the worship of science as something that it really isn't. So we heard over the last 4 years about how science is perfect. It's unimpeachable. It's not the place for questioning. It's not the place for uncertainty. And in fact, scientists of the past have always told us, Einstein, in, as an example, have always told us how important it is to remain curious, to have a stance of openness, so that if a new bit of information comes along that contradicts the theory that you hold, that questions the theory that you hold, that you're always willing to allow that theory to be malleable, to make it open to the world, to make it, and that there's nothing, I don't know how we came to believe that asking questions or being curious or even being uncertain were bad things, were a sign of our stupidity or a sign of our immaturity. It's actually exactly the opposite. Heather Heying, who you might know very well, an evolutionary biologist, she very generously contributed a quotation on this to the book, because I think she's had such interesting things to say about certainty and audacity in science, right? She says, scientists have become so audacious. We dare to say that we could be certain about anything. But if it's possible to be certain about anything in science, it's a very small number of things, right? So when I talk about scientism, I mean this new brand of science and scientists who, I mean, didn't Fauci say something like, well, you're questioning science, so you're questioning me,
Yeah.
as though he's conflating the two, right? And he's doing two things there. He's saying not only that he is science, but that neither of those things ought to be questioned ever. And as small s science and as Fauci a public servant, of course, both of them should be open to question. So I don't have a problem with science at all. And as a philosopher, someone from the humanities, people might think, well, maybe she doesn't understand science very well or isn't interested in science, because often creative people who are interested in literature feel a bit standoffish about science because it's quantitative and analytic and dealing with numbers, and we don't do that in the humanities as much. But that's not true at all. I have a great deal of respect for science, and I think we've seen some incredible work being done by scientists and very scientific doctors in Canada and in the world over the last 4 years, who have really dug into. I mean, you look at the team of scientists that Naomi Wolf has amassed, for example, for her Daily Clout project, and how they just took that Pfizer document, which is just reams upon reams of data, and went through them and collated that into something that would make sense for the public. That's science, right? That's being scientific. Scientism, on the other hand, is when we allow our values to go ahead of the facts, right? And we say that we have ideas about what needs to come out of this study. And we're going to rearrange the study and rearrange the nomenclature to make sure we get that result. And so when we saw language over the last 4 years, like science, hashtag science, um, I think what was to stand in for an argument, to stand in for giving evidence, or when people would say things, if you ask a question about the COVID response or anything else of a scientific nature, and people respond and say, "What, don't you believe in science?" That rhetorical question suggests, "You idiot, you're supposed to believe everything the so-called acceptable scientists or experts are telling us,"
Right.
without thinking, by the way. That's not your job. And I don't think that the good scientists of the past or the good scientists we have now would ever do that. They would say, you know, your questions matter.
Yeah.
Your questions might lead us to a place that we've not been able to get to before. You asked me that question earlier, what is ethics or why does it matter? Um, and I gave an answer, but it's not the only answer. And I certainly hope if you're watching that you'll ask yourself that question and ask yourself, how has my life gone when I thought more and less deeply about moral questions? How has my life gone when I did what I believed versus when I kind of backed down and just complied or just did something in an unthinking way? Right? Uncertainty, it sounds like it's a terrible thing, but it's so incredibly important. So scientism, I believe, is this religious version of
That's
science that seems to have taken off in 2020, but surely didn't, because I don't think anything that exploded in 2020 really did. There were the seeds of it and I write about this in the book a lot, that we saw the seeds of it leading up to 2020, and we just had we had a crisis that revealed what had been going on in the world for actually many decades before that.
Yeah, yes. That's you led right into my next question because I noticed this too, almost like this religious fervor. Again, scientism becomes a religion. It's a where to place your faith, right? I don't wear a mask. Well, hashtag trust the science. And that was it. End of story. Trust the science because Anthony Fauci is science. And, just to kind of comment on that for a second, when he said that, what I saw was a man who believed he was transcending into the status of a demigod, where what he said was just the authoritarian edict handed down to the world. Follow what I say because I am now science. Like he was some all-seeing being where, I'm no scientist. I'm a writer. I'm an essayist. I think I've held a beaker once in my life, but even I know that science is constantly broken. It's constantly challenged, right? We wouldn't have any of our modern technology if the science is with small s science wasn't constantly challenged and wasn't constantly being reworked and reshaped, right? And so I lost where I was going here with that because the scientism element really captured me, especially the way that you wrote about it. And what I do want to talk about is the rabbit duck illusion, because you use that as an analogy for the way that these two segments of our society viewed the same event, in that we seem to have different perceptions or interpret them differently. Can you go into that in the way that you apply it in your book and the way that it was applied again to society at large?
Mhm. I don't know how many of your listeners will be familiar with the illusion. Maybe you're able to put up an image or something of it in
I'll
the,
splice it in. Yeah.
in the middle. But basically, it's a drawing, sort of a pen and ink drawing of an animal that looks like it. Well, so you don't want to say it in advance because you don't really want to uh, sort
Give
of
it away.
predispose someone to thinking it's one thing over the other. I can say most people, when they look at this image, see a rabbit with two ears kind of sticking out behind it. And then either it occurs to them later or someone points out to them, or some people do see it this way from the beginning. They say, wait a minute, that's not a rabbit. It's a duck. And the ears are actually the beak. And the eye would stay the eye. So the eye of the rabbit is the eye of the duck. It's an illusion that is used in psychology a lot. It dates back to an 1892 German humor writer. I think it was a humor magazine. But the point, and it was actually, I think it was made famous by Ludwig Wittgenstein, who was a philosopher of language. And his point was that, how we, the words we use to describe the world have a big influence on how we think about the world, and vice versa. So the point about the image is that whichever one you see first predisposes you to see the world in a certain way. But once you see that the other animal is also present, so if you saw the rabbit first and then someone points out to you, oh, but don't you see the duck too? And then you look, you look, I do see the duck. It's very unlikely that you will ever be able to not see it. And then in the book, I write about this secondary illusion that's a bit of a different one, but it captures the same phenomenon where you look at this series of what looks like a bunch of black and white dots that are just kind of a disordered arrangement. And when you look a little more closely, you can see that actually there's a Dalmatian that has its head down, taking a drink from the water. There used to be, I haven't seen them for a long time, when you go into the malls and they would have these 3D images set up and you'd have to stare at them for a long time and try to go cross-eyed, and then you could see it eventually. And as soon as you could get yourself to do it, you could pretty much do it thereafter, right? So it's a little bit like that. My point in bringing up those images is that once people started, the people who did, started to see what was going on in the world, including things like maybe the government COVID response didn't make that much sense. Maybe journalists and media enterprises weren't covering the whole side of the story. Maybe what happened in Ottawa wasn't making it onto the CBC News. Maybe they couldn't trust their doctor. Maybe, the FDA and Health Canada have a relationship with pharmaceutical companies that isn't as appropriate as it ought to have been. Once you started to see the world in that way, you really couldn't ever unsee it. And it started to impact all the other data you receive from the world. So if you first started to hear about pharmaceutical company collusion, for example, and how many hundreds of billions of dollars the companies spend on advertising their products. And then you might start to think, well, I wonder what's going on with media. And you go down that rabbit hole and you find out that, well, also in relation to the pharmaceutical products, as we're just learning on Tucker Carlson, that it's not just that pharmaceutical companies spend a lot of money marketing their products, but they're also potentially buying off the media enterprises that are reaping the benefits from those advertising dollars. So the world is a complex place, and we are only able to absorb a certain percentage of the data that we get from the world. But the perception that we have of that data is what matters. And you can imagine you watch, say, for example, the interview with Putin, right?
Yeah.
And you watch it with someone who's very left-leaning and who's very pro-narrative, we might say. Two different people watching the same experience would have very different takeaways, very different interpretations of what was going on there. And I think there are people still to this day who will never question the government response to COVID, who
Yeah.
would never, I mean, I know people who would never believe that their doctor could make a mistake, and who would never believe that pharmaceutical companies are anything other than philanthropic. And they will always be duck seers or rabbit seers, depending on how
Right.
you put it, and won't be able to make that shift. Those of us who did make a shift are, I think, in a really tough spot. We're in an enlightened spot, but there's a lot of baggage that comes along with that, because now it means that you're in a default state of distrust all the time. And that's not a happy place to be in. I mean, there was something nice about when you could just turn on the news and figure out from Peter Mansbridge what happened during the day and not have to worry too
Right.
much about interpreting it and
Right.
doing your own research,
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and that just isn't the case anymore, I think. And whether it will ever be the case again, I don't think we know. I believe myself, and I have said before, that I think our institutions are fundamentally beyond repair. And I think we need to raise them to the ground, but that will only happen when a big enough percentage of the population decides that we don't need what you're selling anymore. And
Right.
that's a big deal because that means finding other sources of healthcare, other ways to educate your children. It means becoming less reliant on big banks. I mean, it's a very big shift in your life. But I believe we're at the point where we no longer have the option to have have your cake and eat it too kind of morality. I believe you can't live as a good person and buy into the narrative and reap all the benefits of the people who do. It's a
Abs
choice.
yes,
You know?
totally. I found my thought from 2 thoughts ago, and I was reading your book last night, and I was thinking about my my last moment of innocence, where it was. And, you have you draw a historical narrative over the decades that led us to that moment. And
Mhm.
I think my last moment, excuse me, of innocence was September 10th, 2001, actually. I think that was the last day that I lived in ignorance of the world around me and what was really happening.
Yeah.
And it feels like the last 20 years we've just been building into this moment. Like there's this darkness that descended over us, especially in the West, that just kind of built and built and built and built into March 2020.
Mhm.
And I the outcome for me has been, and just alluding to what you just said, for me, I'm far more cynical than I want to be. You know,
Mhm.
like I used to warn my friends about being overly cynical because cynicism tends to lead to apathy
And bitterness
and
and
bitterness, right? And even nihilism, because you reach a point where, well, none of this matters because it's all corrupt and it's all shit, right?
yeah.
And so for me, coming out of the last 4 years, and I mean, I'm still here in a lot of ways, I just find myself so cynical. Like I don't trust any of our institutions anymore. I don't
Mhm.
trust anything any politician has to say. And so it's like I'm living in this world where I just can't believe anything that comes through our institutions or through our media. And so where do we go from here? And I guess that's the question I wanted to ask you. Where do we go from this point?
It's so hard. Cynicism is such a difficult thing because when you are cynical, it means that you're not trusting in the relationships around you, whether it's with people in your intimate circle or it's with doctors or the healthcare institution more generally, or government more generally, or whatever it is. And morality is relational. It's about our relationships with other people. So when you're cynical, you really don't have a set of healthy relationships with any of those things. And that's hard. Not, I mean, it's sad because it means we don't have those relationships in the world, but it's also hard on you as a person because then you're no longer a person in a trusting relationship with your community. You're not in a trusting relationship with your doctor or with your with your MP or whoever it is. And so there's a loneliness to that nihilism you pointed out, which I think is we talked about meaninglessness earlier.
Yeah.
And so, but we need not to confuse loneliness and isolation with meaninglessness, right? So you
Right.
might have fewer relationships that you ever had before. You might have less trust in institutions than you ever had before, but that doesn't mean that you don't have a deep sense of meaning in your life,
That's right.
right?
Yeah.
And I think going forward, I said before, we have to make a choice, right? In the book, I write about Frost's poem and how there are these two paths that diverge in the woods, and one is the less traveled one, but I think Frost never really mentioned just how rocky and difficult that path would be, but also how beautiful it would be. And I think a lot of people who have left the comfort of the crowd over the last 4 years and struck out on their own, or probably joined new communities of people that they never knew before, in the freedom community, and or have new friends or different marriages or whatever it is they have now, even though there's some isolation and discomfort in that, there's also a sense that now I know that what I'm building, even though I'm starting from scratch, now I know that what I'm building is based on truth. I know it makes sense. I know that however small it is, it's stable and I can grow from there. And I think one of our challenges moving forward is to figure out how to be, we hear about self-reliance a lot these days, and almost become a cliche in the freedom movement that we have to become independent and good researchers and self-reliant, but it's a cliche for a reason because institutions do a lot for us, right? They give us free healthcare in Canada for the most part. They tell us which side of the road to drive on and where not to park and how to get a mortgage and how to take care of our health. Supposedly, lo and behold, it turned out that all of that is about the worst thing you can do for yourself. But anyway, um, and but when you're left without the guidance from the institutions that have framed our lives in Western culture, there are a lot of holes that you need to fill in for yourself, right? And that's why we're seeing people in the freedom movement buying Bitcoin and gold and silver, and or people talking about stuffing money under their beds because they don't know what else to do. They don't want to be
Yeah.
part of a big bank anymore. And
Yeah.
homeschooling and pod schooling and all of that is just exploding because people feel like whatever I don't know what I'm going to do, but I'm not sending my kids for 8 hours a day of indoctrination where they aren't going to learn anything anyway, by the way.
Yeah.
And I can say, this is not a secret. Having taught the products of our public school system for 20 years, I don't know what they're doing at school for
Yeah.
their 12, 13 years for 8 hours a day, but I didn't see the evidence of a lot of learning about anything. And I don't mean just not learning about history and geography and mathematics and things like that, but learning who you are and how to ask questions and having enough confidence to develop your own thoughts about the world. And lo and behold, the fact that we didn't train our young people to do that, we're
Yeah.
seeing the effects of that now because we have a whole citizenry of people in their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, all the way up to the baby boomer age who have no idea how to step out of the comfort of the crowd and think for themselves, right?
Yeah. And
You can do it. It's possible. It's possible to learn, even at a ripe old age. It's possible to learn how to do that, but it's a
yeah.
lot of work, and people
Yeah.
like you
Oh yeah. Sorry. You just brought something right to the front of my mind. Sorry, I don't mean to
right
interrupt.
there.
Yeah, because well, free thinkers in this system, whether it's the education system or, post ed, your adult life, we're not in the box. And because we're not in the box, we don't
Yeah.
belong anywhere. And, my own story, I dropped out of high school into 10th grade because I was frequently put in stupid classes when the teachers who really cared knew it was evident that I needed to be put in the incentive programs because I was just really, really bored and not being challenged. And I remember in 10th grade, I think we were reading Othello in English class, and I was already reading Dante. And so I told my teacher, I'm not really interested in Othello because I read Othello in like seventh grade on my own, right? I want to read, I'm reading Divine Comedy right now. I'm really into this book. She said, look, if you can read Divine Comedy, understand it, and write a book report for me, I'll give you an automatic A in this class because she was sure I had no idea what I was reading. So I did. I wrote my report. She gave me the A, and I had a spare block for the rest of the semester, and that sealed the deal for me. I was like, no, this system has completely failed me. Like I most of what I know now as an adult are things that I picked up on my own that I taught myself, right? And so like now I have children who are passing through the education system, and I realize more and more that as their parent, it's on me to teach them what they're actually going to use because like you said, the system is more or less an indoctrination machine. It's
Mhm.
that's really all it is it's trying to take those brilliant or individualistic people and smash them into that box and make them part of the 70%, you know?
This is so sad. And one of the things we've learned so much about genius is that it's really just a kind of creativity and fearlessness. It's not that you know so many more facts than somebody else. In fact, you probably don't,
Yeah.
right? There was a study done quite a while ago by NASA scientists, and it's often referenced by the homeschooling community, the Montessori community. But during the study, they tried to figure out what was going on with children they assessed their levels of brilliance or genius before they entered the school system when they were 4 or 5, and then they tracked it, as they went through, and the graph looks like this, right?
Yeah.
So they had 90% of them had a certain number of markers in common with geniuses, people who are technically genius, and then every year they went through the school system, it just went down, down, down until they were, their IQ had dropped significantly. So we think of being smart as a function of knowing stuff, when if being smart has to do with IQ and IQ has to do with creativity and how fearless you are to ask questions and explore new connections and see patterns in different ways. Our school system, it seems, is very, it's not just that it's very bad at training for that, but it trains our ability out of that. So in some sense, as horrifying as it is to say, it would be better to take a 4 or 5-year-old and do nothing with them,
Isn't that crazy?
you know?
Isn't that crazy? I believe exactly what you're saying, because I've watched it happen with my own children. I've watched as the education system tries to strip the creativity out of them, and all of that beauty that comes with just making things and imagining, a world that they're actually actively working with their tiny little brains to create. And it's like it takes all the color out and just makes it black and white, you know. Um, Dr. Ponesse, I know I'm keeping you over time here a bit, so I want to ask you one final question. We've talked about uh, our lost innocence, our last moment of innocence. Your book, and people listening or watching this, I cannot recommend this book enough. I read it last. I was up until 1:30, 2 a.m. reading last night, and not because I had to. I was actually really captured by it, because we've we've focused a lot on data and science and numbers and percentage of the population, this percentage of, all cause excess mortality, so on and so forth. But what your book does is it captures the human element, the humanity in all of this. And it's something that we've sorely missed throughout this entire process. So I want to ask you, just in conclusion, um, how do we regain our innocence? Is there a way for us to get it back, or is it gone forever?
Well, innocence is a double-edged sword. I don't know if I want to give the impression that we lost it and we should do everything possible to get it back. Because though innocence in childhood, I think, is very valuable, our job when we're undergoing the process of maturation and becoming adults is to develop ourselves, right? And so much literature and so much theater revolves around these coming of age stories. And coming of age stories very often involve a terrible revelation for the central character, right? Um, but it's coming to see the world for what it is and not letting it rob you of the best person you can be in the midst of that, right? So, yes, we've lost innocence in the sense that the world might never be as simple as we thought it was. We may never be able to go through our day or through our lives with as much blind faith as possible. So we've lost the ignorance to our innocence, but that doesn't mean we have to give up the joy and the lightness of being and purposeful living and meaningful living and prioritizing, quiet, meaningful, joyful time with our children over other people, over other things. A very practical, sort of upshot of all of this is I ask myself on a daily basis whether I want the internet to be part of my life going forward. We're given a certain number of years to our life on this earth, and uh, sometimes I look at my phone and I see what my average number of, I'd like to say minutes, but it's hours a day
Mhm.
was a previous week. And sometimes when work is really busy, for example, or even when it isn't, and I've just been mindlessly doing things I wish I hadn't done, I think, wow, was that really a good use of my time? You know? So I think it's going to require us to make a lot of conscious decisions moving forward about what we're going to do with the time we have left. I end the book with or in the conclusion with a little thought experiment, and I ask the reader to imagine what someone might say in the eulogy given at the end of your life. And what would they say, do you think, based on how you're living now versus what would you ideally want them to say, and how close together or far apart are those pictures? And if they're really far apart, then we have some very serious questions to ask ourselves and some changes to make in our lives.
Yeah. Well, Dr. Ponesse, that's a perfect way to conclude this. And I'm glad you're still on the internet for now because we were able to have this conversation
For now.
today. um, Before we go, Dr. Ponesse, would you mind telling everybody where they can find you?
Yes, absolutely. We didn't get to talk about this very much, but I'm now on the board of TWC, the wellness company. I'm the chief of biomedical ethics, and so you can go there and find some information about me there. Also, Dr. Julie Ponesse on Instagram and on Twitter. And you can get the book amazon.com.ca, Kindle or paperback. So
And I cannot recommend the book enough. As soon as we're done this conversation, I'm going to sit down right there and finish reading it.
some
So,
more.
yeah. Once again, Dr. Ponesse, thank you for your time today. Thank you for the conversation. You have left me with a lot to think about. So, thank you very much.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much.